Hillsong, for anybody who doesn't know, is a multimedia powerhouse in the Christian world. Hillsong Church in Australia, Hillsong Worship, Hillsong United, close to $100 million a year in annual revenue. They give Joel Osteen's church in Houston, Texas, a run for their money when it comes to annual revenue. I took the article here from the Christian Post. Brian Houston stepping down from helm of Hillsong for not reporting the sexual abuse that his father perpetrated when he was the pastor of the church. So this kind of surprised me, in all honesty. We have this idea of a statute of limitations, right? So not all crimes can be prosecuted forever. Like, you can't just steal a soda from a store and be prosecuted for that 20 years later. You can be prosecuted for murder indefinitely. And so I was actually surprised that this was a thing. But he is being sued for not reporting the indiscretions of his father quite some time ago. And it turns out the abuse of his father was reported to church leadership. And then once again, instead of actually dealing with it, they swept it under the rug once again. I think last week we talked a lot about sweeping things under the rug. So this week I thought I wanted to talk about the cult of personality. These mega churches depend on people seeing the leader as this awesome leaders. And so Brian Houston is an awesome leader, and awesome leaders don't do bad things. Therefore, Brian Houston could not possibly do bad things. Regardless of what actually happened, their confirmation bias is what informs the situation instead of reality.
Yeah, and then there's like the whole dynastic thing to this too. It makes, I get it. If you have a small church in a small town, like I get it. You know, the father was the pastor of this church for 40 years and then his son takes over as pastor. I can get that. This isn't a small, tiny church. This is that corporate Christianity
Exactly.
Lecrae was complaining about. The biggest problem to me with these corporate churches is that in order to have a church structured like this, you have to be such a huge fan of just capitalism that you don't understand that capitalism and Jesus are not the same thing. And so you create a corporation and you say, well, we can manage ourselves. You know, we don't need anybody else to tell us what to do, but you do. Like, you are saying that like, we are the ones at the top. We are in charge of our own oversight. Yeah, because that works.
You're right. That always worked well. Yeah.
You know, that's a benefit of a denomination over one of these types of churches. But one of these types of churches could manage it if they were, you know, radically transparent.
There was an old feature piece on 60 Minutes where they interviewed Brian. He was clearly aware of just how awful these transgressions were. And he was aware that you can't do nothing and then feel like you're washed clean, right? And feel a sense of cleanliness about everything. But as the years go on and you watch his interviews, you can clearly see that he's agitated that this hasn't gone away yet. He's agitated that people are concentrating on his unwillingness to righteously deal with the indiscretions of his father. It's instead of just saying, well, you weren't actually the perpetrator, so we should just let you off the hook. And like, he's clearly got a really thin skin about this. And it's clear that he thinks that he's above criticism.
There is an extent to which I could understand that, you know, when, you know, Paul writes about how, you know, each of us will be rendered unto us for our own actions.
Yeah.
That was eloquent. Basically, he was trying to say, like, there is no corporate punishment. You know, God isn't just going to punish all of us for the sins of some of us. You know, we will each eat it for our own sin. If this was, you know, the father's sin, I mean, why is the son having to get all this pressure about it? Well, partially because, you know, you did have an obligation to maybe say something. So he might, you know, feel that, you know, oh, I didn't do anything wrong, except you did. You know, you can't say, well, I didn't do anything wrong because I didn't break the law. That's not how this works.
Right.
I keep saying that phrase. I got to find another phrase, right?
Right.
But
especially when the Bible tells us that to be a leader or to be a servant in God's house is to be above reproach. We see not just that people fail, because we're human and we fail, but we see people have no concern or regard for that piece of counsel, that to be a good leader, to be a wise leader, to be a trusted leader, to be a long-lived leader, to have longevity in leadership. Being above reproach is a key element in that. And even if we can't attain that, we should still aspire to it.
Right. And, and being above reproach isn't merely the absence of sin. You have to be positively beyond reproach. That is to say, your actions need to be so upstanding, nobody can even consider that you would be sinning in the background, right?
Yeah.
And this is a case in which, maybe you weren't, there was no mandatory reporting law, but this was not legal. It's not like, you caught somebody's son shoplifting a candy bar.
Right.
And you're trying to extend grace and do something like that. This is not that.
Yeah.
Not every sin requires the same treatment.
Exactly. Some things aren't that hard, right? Don't murder people. That's not a super hard one.
I don't know, man. Sometimes it's hard.
There are things that are hard. Like, hey, when somebody slaps you across the face, offer him your other cheek. That's a tough one, right? There's pride in there. There's ego. There's physical pain. There's the fight or flight response. There's a lot that goes into that.
Yeah.
That intellectuality itself is not going to solve, right? Don't abuse children. Don't sexually exploit children. Don't do nothing when other people sexually exploit children. That should not be a crisis of faith or a crisis of action among church leaders.
Not in the slightest. It's sad to me to say that there's a greater problem within Hillsong, just period. The woman, Anna Crenshaw was her name. She was sexually assaulted by somebody in the church who, had a position of authority, and she wasn't taken seriously. There was references to another branch, so the Hillsong East Coast in the United States had its own collection of financial and sexual assault scandals. Something seems to be systemically jacked with Hillsong as a de facto denomination.
I very, very, very casually follow the stock market, right? And so when the stock market's doing really well, everybody's along for the ride and in for the party. It doesn't matter that it doesn't make sense why certain stocks are rising. People just keep putting their money in stocks no matter how irrational it is. We all know that housing prices are too high. We all know that 7% inflation is mind-bogglingly impossible to sustain, right? And yet, we keep acting as if the party will never end. It kind of reminds me of what Hillsong's doing. Like, life is so good. $100 million every year. We don't have a care in the world. There's no need to worry about the righteousness of our pastors all over the world. The gravy train's running. Just let it run for as long as it can.
I want to disagree with you and say, no, that's not what it is, but it's difficult not to see it that way. I mean, it really is challenging to look at Hillsong and have there be this many problems within the organization broadly and say that, oh, no, they have the right mindset. It seems like they don't. It seems like the leadership is plagued with people probably on the, narcissistic side.
Yeah.
And one might argue that you cannot have somebody become the pastor of a megachurch without them being a narcissist in the first place. Doesn't mean they can't be a good, faithful pastor, but it does mean that there is considerations that need to be made. You need to have systemic limitations in place on their power. You need to have oversight and all that.
What's the fix for this?
Radical transparency is going to be your structural fix, right?
Yeah.
People need to know what's going on. You need to have a culture of, hey, when somebody creates a sin, it's a sin. It's not harming anybody. It's not against the law. No biggie. But when somebody has done something against another human being that is a violation of the law, you need to be the first to say, yeah, we need to bring this out into public attention. I know that it sucks when your neighbors see you getting arrested. Yeah, it'd be better that, maybe people saw it coming and not, all of a sudden what happened here, and certainly not hiding it, right? Because it's easy to get the mindset that, hey, if I'm the head, of this church and bad things are happening in my congregation, that's going to make my church look bad. That's going to make me look bad. The Apostle Paul took the approach of, no, it makes you look bad because you're doing the sin. But when you try to hide this stuff, when you try to keep it from really coming to light so you can maintain this shiny product, well, what ends up happening is you make your church look terribly bad and you make other churches look bad, right? Because you just make it look like Christians are completely okay with being complicit in a crime by hiding it, by not bringing it to the attention of the proper authorities.
The other thing I would say is we have to accept the reality that people are people. right? And people will always act in their own best self-interest. And so if your concern with the church is, you know what, I wish you guys played more hymns, that's great. Bring that up to the pastor. Bring that up to the worship leader. You know what, I wish you guys had a more robust kids program. Great. Bring that up to the pastor. Bring that up to the worship leader. My daughter told me that she was sexually abused. You don't bring that up to the pastor or the worship leader. You go to the police.
Yeah.
It's time to stop treating pastors and church elders as if they're infallible, because they're not. They're human beings just like the rest of us, and they will always, always, always instinctively move to their own self-interest. Church leaders are not professional investigators.
No.
And so when something like an allegation of rape or incest or sexual assault or money laundering or any of those things comes to light, yes, it's great that you own your own lumber business and you're the elder of the church, but that doesn't make you qualified to investigate anything of this magnitude. So the idea that you and your other elders can properly investigate this and bring true biblical justice to bear is kind of laughable. You need to be thinking in terms of what is the above reproach way to handle this. And then you need to have the humility of saying, I'm probably not qualified to handle this, and I should put this in somebody's hands that is more qualified than I am.